Okay, cool. So when we consider Palo Alto, it's same as the other devices. How we take console of it and configure, do an initial configuration. So I'll just get to the CLI and show you how do we basically configure a management interface. Where in this case, I have a Palo Alto firewall which is connected to the local management network that I am running internet and I am talking to you through, so that it gets a DHCP IP address and then I can access it directly on the terminal, on the browser here. So otherwise, if we need to configure a Palo Alto with the management interface, it's pretty straightforward single command that we will have to use. Let me wait for this to start. Why is it not starting back? Okay. So since I already have a configuration in for you to demonstrate, I have changed the password for the firewall. So, but basically it's going to be admin and admin when you first start with. And as you see, we have got an IP from the local management network, just because I have created a management cloud and I have mapped the management interface to it. And the management interface set to DHCP, and it gets an IP over here. This is the easiest way to access the firewall when you're doing a lab. But if you want to configure a new firewall where management interface is connected down to a PC and you're accessing it through a PC, all you got to do is get into the config mode where you type configure and enter, and you got to type set device config system IP address, and you provide the IP. This is the default IP that we have in Palo Alto. I'm just trying to give that, and you configure the net mask of 24. And that's it. So if we have a gateway, in this case, we are just accessing the firewall through a PC directly connected. So we're not going to give a gateway. You just configure this and then hit enter. So you configure the IP address, and post doing that, unlike Cisco, you won't have the config taking effect immediately. You just have to commit it. And once you commit, it's same with the GUI and CLI. Once you commit and enter, you will see the commit happening. Once it completes 100%, you can make sure the config is saved and config is effective on the device for it to work. All right. So I have a plan to demonstrate how we configure administrative roles or admin username password onto the firewall. So here, this is the overview of the dashboard of the firewall. So here you have the general information on what's the management IP, netmask, gateway, and license, if it is having any license, what version is running in and everything. And of course, the system information, CPU, data plane CPU, and management CPU. ACC, it's a monitoring tab that we have in Palo Alto. It's a GUI monitoring, I would say. It will track the network activity. And if we have any policy defined, and if it's blocking due to any threat or content ID or URL, it can show up here. And tunnel activity and all those stuffs over here. The network tab for configuring interface, routing, any network related configuration. objects for configuring address object, address group, service, application, and all those security profiles that I told you. And coming down to policy, I think we have had a brief discussion about almost all the tabs here. So for today, I'll just demonstrate on how do you configure a user locally on the firewall. So I'm just configuring a user with name network journey admin. And if it has, just give me 1 second if you don't mind. I have someone at the door. Okay. So as I was talking about the admin roles, I am configuring a username with network journey admin. And this option here, you will be defining this if you have an AD integration onto your firewall and you got to pull the password profile from the AD username that you have configured on the Active Directory. So in this case, I'm going to do a normal password. I'm giving admin 123. And this is about giving privileges to the user on what he should access or what he shouldn't access. So basically, super user has access to everything. Device administrator also has access to everything and can modify everything, but he will not be able to make any admin username or password changes. Device administrator, super user read only can access or have read only access to everything, and device administrator again won't be having access to change the management IP and won't be able to have access to change anything, and he can't view the device administrator roles as well. So I'm giving this user super user read only here, just to know that he is not able to access anything after we log out and log in. So I'll just commit this. I forgot to show you one more thing that we are supposed to consider while committing. I'll just show you when we do the next lab. There's something called commit all changes and commit the changes made by the specific administrator. So basically, let's say more than a user is working on the same firewall, and he has some pending changes before committing, and you have also done some changes, and if you go ahead and commit all changes, it's going to commit his changes as well. So that's not what we want or what we are supposed to do. We're supposed to make sure that we select the specific user who is working, and only his changes should be committed. That's the best practice that we have to follow. So let me so now we see the network journey admin is created. You should see a logout screen here. We don't have a logout here for
in the bottom left there is logout.
Do we see that? Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, at the bottom left.
Okay. In the new 10. 10.3 or 10.3 or later, I guess it's the GUI has shifted down to left side, I believe. So I was a little confused. So I'm just logging in as network journey admin, and we're going to see if we are able to make any changes or not, because I have made super user read only for this user. So we are not supposed to have any option to make changes, or it shouldn't allow us to make any changes here. Okay, I will try to do a basic. You see, you're getting a grayed out symbol everywhere. You will not be able to add or do any changes anywhere. So even if you go inside Ethernet one by one, you will not be able to do anything. So that's about super user read only. The same with others. As I said, we'll just try to log into the super user that we have. And I have something to show you about how we configure a basic NAT policy, a security policy, and we access the internet. Considering this as an internet router, I've configured this with 8.8.8, and it is enabled with SSH as well. Right. So I've just taken out all the configs in Palo Alto so that I show you how to do that. So basically, this is considered as a PC. Whenever needed, if there is a demand for the actual Windows machine to be available, I will be using the actual Windows machine, or else I'll be using a router just to save out some space for the RAM, because a Windows machine will need about 4 GB of RAM every time I use it. So this is considered to be a PC, and I have a basic default route pointing to the firewall's interface, and firewall in turn should have a default route pointing to this router and other stuffs for making this traffic pass through. And we are going to achieve SSH access on this to this router from this one. So, and the traffic will be natted as well. So considering this as an internet facing interface, and considering this as internet router, we're going to try and do natting and try to achieve SSH access to this device. Okay. So first thing we should do is configure the interfaces and IP addresses. So for that, I'm going into Network tab, and I'm going to Interfaces. And okay, let me delete this. I just forgot to clean this up. Okay. So first thing, we have to create a zone so that we can map this to an interface. So I'm just creating a zone for the inside interface, that is inside zone, and I'm choosing the type of the interface to be layer 3 and clicking on OK. And I'm going to create another zone called outside, and I'm going to give it type layer 3 and OK. And coming up to interfaces, and in the diagram I see Ethernet 1 by 1 is inside and 1 by 2 was outside, and I think the IP schema should be .10 for all the firewalls. So I'm going to Ethernet 1 by 1, and this is a comment that I can provide. As I said, it's a layer 3 and virtual router. So here virtual router is again something we see in normal router, a normal Cisco router or any router. We see something called VRF. So here it's the same thing that happens here. So when you're not putting any interface in any specific customized VRF on a router, what it does, it puts itself into the default VRF, right? So when you just give show IP route, that means the router's default VRF is default, and it's going to show all the routing configuration or routing entries for that specific default VRF. So basically, router uh, has it in its case. Similar way, Firewall also has a virtual router with a default VRF to it. And I'm just going to assign this interface to the default VRF. I'm not going to create any VRF. If we want to, we are free to do that. And I'm putting this in inside interface, and the IP will be /24. So here I'm free to create an object by going into objects tab and use that object here, or I can create an object directly from here, an address object. I'm just creating an IP directly here. And one more thing, if this interface needs to have any management profile, by management profile, what I mean is you make sure this interface is accessible for all the services that you mentioned here that has to be accessible to. So let's say I give this name as ping, and I provide just ping access to it because it's an entire inside interface. So all the necessary configs are done. Virtual router, security zone, that's it. So I talked about management profile ping that I have configured here. If you have to configure from the actual position where it resides, it is here. Under network, under interface management, you go create and map it over there, right? So coming down, you configure the interface number 2 to be layer 3, and it is supposed to be in default VRF again, and outside zone. And let me check. What's the IP schema? It's 100.10. Right. And I am going to provide this with ping as well. All right. So interface config is done. So as I said, this guy will have a default route towards this Palo Alto and Ethernet 1x1, and Palo Alto should have routing enabled to this gig 0x0 IP address, which we will configure now. So I'm getting into default VRF. You remember this is the default, this is the VRF that I have put the Ethernet 1x1 interface on. So I'm going to static routes, add, giving it a name. And I am going to provide the destination as the IP address of the router that's on the other side, and it has to go out through Ethernet 1x2. And next stop will be the IP address that I'll be mapping. And I'm sorry, this is going to be a default route, as I said already. And this is going to be the IP address of the next stop router. I'm going to keep everything as defaults. It should be good. Just check if the IP address I've configured is right. Yes. All right. So otherwise, I think all the routing is enabled on all the routers. So if you see, I need to see 10 network on the ISP router here. So I'm on this router and I'm able to see this network, which is already been configured. And we have configured a default route to this one. So this should take care of this routing. And I will again check if I see 8.8 network that this router can reach. Yes, it can reach. So we will start configuring the security policy now to allow. So basically, considering Palo Alto, it has two default rules, which is intrazone and interzone rule. Intrazone, as the name suggests, it belongs to two same zones. Let's say traffic coming from inside zone, let's say same VLAN user or anyone belonging to same zone as the destination is trying to access, it's allowed by default. And if it's interzone, traffic between two different zones is by default denied. So basically, if you are supposed to do any if you're supposed to allow anything, you're supposed to define it in the security policy. So I'm creating a security policy, naming in out, and source zone will be inside, the traffic coming from inside. So as of now, we are not doing any NAT. So I'm defining source zone is inside and destination zone outside. And maybe I'll choose destination IP as, maybe I'll create a object here. So I'm just concerned about this IP that I have to SSH. I can click OK, right? Forget about the user for the moment. We'll come to that later. Okay, this should be in destination. Source for now, I'm keeping it as any. Destination, let me pick this one. Application, I'll just say ping, because I need to ping this and verify. And I'll say SSH. And an interesting thing here is SSH by default works with port number 22, as we all know. And if we are leaving service as application default, it's going to mean that SSH will work on its default application. Sorry, what did I choose? If we are running the server that's managed by us, and if it runs SSH on 2222, we are supposed to choose SSH 2222, or we can provide application as any and then provide port number 2222 here. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to commit this. See, again, now I'm committing with commit all changes. I know only I'm accessing this, but when you're working in production, it's supposed to go as only your username should be only your changes should be committed. So which means you have to choose that option and commit the changes. So the commit is successful now. So till now, I'm not doing any natting here. So I will just try to check if I can ping this person. So I can ping now. I must have showed you before that I'm not able to, I should not be able to ping. So I missed it. So right now I'm able to achieve ping from the inside PC towards this router's IP address. And I should also able to take SSH because I have allowed SSH. We can just refresh this one and see the hit count here. So now I've initiated multiple pings and there are 15 hit counts onto this rule. And when was the last hit and when was the first hit on the rule can be looked up here. And coming down on the session browser, since it's a ping, the timeout value will be almost 1 second. So most probably I should not be able to see anything here, but when we SSH, there is going to be a TCP session forming. So I can show you the session browser with the logs here. So going down, the last step that we are left with is called configuring a NAT rule. So here in this case, considering this topology, we are going to do a source NAT here. Do you all agree? We're going to do a source NAT for this IP to get NATed to the interface of the Palo Alto, outside interface of the Palo Alto. So I spoke about zone change, destination zone change when the NATing is done for the destination. Otherwise, it's going to be a straightforward rule that we create. So I'm just going to define a name. So how the original packet is going to look like, the person is going to come from inside and he's going to get to outside. So inside, in the sense, you got to compare it with the IP address you're going to access. So the user is basically going to access an IP 10.0.0.1 that is on the inside zone, and he's going to go out to 8.8.8.8 that's in the outside zone as per the Palo Alto. And destination interface will be Ethernet 1x2, or it can keep any. Service, for now I'm keeping it any. Source address, again, I think it is 10. Let me keep it any. I'll just see if this inside LAN is in correlation with the inside network we are using. So destination address, I'll just use this server, internet server, translated packet. So what's the type that we are going to do here? So we are going to try and use dynamic IP input. We're going to do a PAT translation. We are going to translate it with the interface address of the Palo Alto firewall. So it's going to be Ethernet 1x2 outside interface, and IP will be this one. So we are not going to do a destination translation. You can leave it blank and click OK. Commit. So this is what I was supposed to show you. So committing all changes and committing changes done by my user alone. So you're going to give a description. You're free to give a description. I'm committing the changes. Before it gets committed, I'll try to get an SSH session for this. I think it should have committed by now. Let's see if we're able to capture the traffic before the NAT kicks in. So okay, the changes are committed. Okay, I'm into the router. So I have now logged into out-server, which is this one, right? So let's get to the Palo Alto and let's see if there is a hit count on the NAT rule. Yes, we have. We have a hit count on the NAT rule. And let's see the traffic log on the session browser. We have a session that's for SSH. And looking at the flow 1 and flow 2, flow 1 says it's from source to destination and destination to source. So being a TCP traffic, it's considering both the flows. So it's coming from inside zone. Sorry, it's coming from inside zone with this IP and going on to reach this IP. As per the user, he is trying to reach this IP address, and it's using a random port towards the port 22. Flow 2, source 8.8 from the destination, and you see the NATed IP is showing up here as the destination port on the flow 2 from server to client. So which means the traffic has NATed down, and from port 22 to port random port that it has to reach the user to. So this is how you have to write a security or a NAT policy. Going into details of each and every tab that we see here, we will be going into great details of this. But for now, I just wanted to show you how the basic network setup would look like on a Palo Alto. It's pretty straightforward. Once you get hands-on, it's going to be pretty straightforward for you to manage Palo Alto. And something interesting for tomorrow, I'm going to show you Panorama. I'm trying to get the lab set. I was not able to make up with the lab setup for today. I will be showing you the Panorama by tomorrow with its features, and if possible, we can try doing a demo on how do we add a firewall to the Panorama's management and manage the firewall through Panorama. So that's the agenda for tomorrow. And before we wind up, I'll open the session for questions. And if you see the chat, if anyone who has missed the chat, you can maybe try to ask your queries regarding the payment on the number or the WhatsApp link mentioned on the chat. And I'll open the session for questions if there is any, and we can wind up and we can start tomorrow with the Panorama. Anyone has any questions?
I have a question on the virtual routers.
Yeah.
So there is security policies and NAT policies which is defined on the Palo Alto, right? How would it know which virtual instance to take?
Okay, you're talking about looking up the policy here, and
Right.
you're asking how it knows which virtual router it should take, right?
Correct.
Okay. To answer that, so initially when you look at the packet processing, it collects a couple of information, and it collects source IP, destination IP, and it collects the information on source zone. And when it comes to slow path, it looks up for the routing, and it looks up which zone it has to go out to, egress zone. So you have, if you remember, you have mapped the interface to a specific zone. Once it finds out which zone the traffic is going out, it can know which interface it has to go out to. And rightly, we have defined the specific interface, which, let's say, it has figured out that it has to go out to Ethernet through Ethernet 1x2. And if you go inside this one, you see that it is being mapped to virtual router default. So it's basically trying to collect few information on the egress stage and the slow path stage. With that information, it does a lookup, and it finds out which interface it has to go out to, and thereby it comes to know whether it's a default VRF or default virtual router it takes, or it takes a different virtual router.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wind up? On any part of the session that we have had today, not only this lab that I covered, any part of the session, if you have any questions, you can let me know.
So on the course, would there be like exercises for us to practice in case? Like, do you have any lab practices that we can do on the EVNG, and would you set up a topology or anything for us to access?
Yes, I can. This time what I have planned is, instead of giving a big topology as a whole, we'll be going through a simple topology for each topic that we see, because each topic demands its own way of using it. Let's say we are using a let me give you an example. Let's say we are using a DHCP server or a DHCP relay. with Palo Alto. Let's say Palo Alto is forwarding DHCP packet to the server, or if it is acting as a DHCP server, we need a router or a Windows server that actually needs to be a DHCP server on the other side. So I can give you a same range of topology that we see here with only 4 or 5 devices. Let's say this device during DHCP relay lab, if we get to do a lab on DHCP relay, this one here will be Windows server which acts as a DHCP, and Firewall will relay the DHCP traffics to this guy. So I'll try to make a simple topology for each topic we are going to do, so that we know what is the actual necessary stuff that we are supposed to take in out of that specific session. So instead, if we have a bigger topology, what I feel is you get lost in configuring some simple stuff, and you actually miss out on what you actually needed. Let's say if this topology is simple, the routing can be established. So in case of DHCP relay, what is important is the DHCP relay config and how firewall communicates to the actual server. It's not about how you configure a routing, because that is covered in the routing lab. So I don't want to mix up things with a big lab each and every time. So I'll just try to make a lab with 4 to 5 devices per session, so that we have
Do you have a exercise document where we can practice ourselves? Like you have explained this, but we will need to configure and see it ourselves how to give us more hands-on.
Parallelly, I can give you a document that will explain on how things are supposed to be configured. So let's say we are configuring a virtual router. I will just be mentioning configure a virtual router. So which is because that's when you actually will go and see where the virtual router is, and you get to go and configure that by your own. If what I feel is, if I give something like go to network tab, go to virtual router, go to default, it is sort of like giving you the whole path on how to do it. Even someone who doesn't know Palo Alto can do this. So what I feel is I'll just give you an overview of how you do the labs, and I'll let you find out where the tab is and how do you go and configure, so that you get used to the GUI interface more. Because if I give you each and every step, you will automatically go ahead and follow that. So it's not going to be self-learning for you, or you will not be able to get used to the GUI as fast as you can. So this would be the right way, I feel. If you need it in that way, I can even provide that one. It's up to you. You can recommend a way so that I can prepare and provide you.
No, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else from anyone before we wind up? We're already 20 minutes past the session, so you will again be getting the recording, so you can work at your own pace and review the session again. Or if there is no questions, or you have it for tomorrow, we can wind up and we can have a meet tomorrow on Panorama Lab.
How long is this course for?
I have planned to cover something which covers almost everything that we have here. Let's say when I started Palo Alto, something like DHCP, DNS proxy stuffs are not walked through. So I feel I have to walk you through on most of, if not everything, which doesn't demand license. If not everything, almost all the tabs should be I should walk through. So I think it should be around 40 to 60 days, 40 to 60 sessions. So I think we are going to have the session from Monday to Thursday. So in that case, if I say 40 to 60 days, it will be wrong. I'll say 40 to 60 sessions. I have about 25 to 30 labs that I can show you. And I just have a list of labs that I've prepared. And I have about close to 30 topics that I have to cover. So each and every topic that I finish, I'll be taking you to the lab at the same time, so that you
So
don't miss
then
these.
you will be sharing the ISO files or the OWF files for us to load ourselves if you have EVNG on our local machine to practice this,
Yeah.
or is it?
Yes, we can do that. So probably what we could do is we can take one session to set up the lab, or our backend team will be available for you to provide you the lab access. So I think we have provided you the contact details of our backend team with the phone number and WhatsApp details. Probably if you contact them, they will be helping you in setting up the lab, or if you have any questions, we can as well discuss it in the class, so that everyone are aware on how to set up a lab on EVNG.
Do you also provide any exam related details for PC and SC?
Yeah, that will be provided at last. If you are planning to take up the certification, yes.
Because isn't the PC and SC sort of an expert levels on this side, or?
Yeah, it will be. It will be covering PC and SC, correct?
Okay.
Anything else?
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so let's wind up here. It's already 25 minutes past our session timing, so I hope the session was useful. And as I said, tomorrow we'll be covering Palo Alto Panorama and integrating Palo Alto Panorama with the Palo Alto Firewall device. And depending on how the time permits, I'll be taking you through as many examples as possible that I can cover in 2 hours. Or I think tomorrow we have 1.5 or 2 hours of class. You'll have to check that. But tomorrow the that's going to be a little interesting. So I hope most of the crowd that are available today will be joining for tomorrow as well. And maybe we can expect a little more crowd who has missed today's class. But yeah, I think it's going to be tomorrow at the same time, 8:30. I will expect most of the people who has joined in today. And yeah.
As a quick question,
Yes.
is it really required the command prompt for this Palo Alto, and we are covering for this CMD as well?
Are you asking about whether I'm going to cover command prompt CLI based configs, or are you asking if it's really necessary?
Yeah, the both question is really matter. Like, is it for the practice session, or we required any really real scenario?
So
real
yeah,
scenario, we required any commands?
Yeah, to answer your question, so whatever we could do in CLI, most of it can be done through GUI as well. So best practice is to use GUI, because you get to see because as a smartphone user, we always get to see tabs, and we get to see stuffs in form of graphical user interface. So we get to catch things more when you see through GUI. That's what I feel that works for me. So when you go through GUI, you don't have to think much about where do you have to go for a security policy creation or stuff like that. But if it's CLI, it's been programmed by Palo Alto. So yeah, you obviously have to provide the right command so that you configure the right thing. So for configuration and most of the stuff that we do on Palo Alto, I recommend using GUI. Probably I have faced in my working experience, I have faced a situation where the traffic log would say the traffic is allowed or denied, but when I go and check in CLI, the same security policy match would say it is allowing on the right rule. So again, we have to go back to Palo Alto TAC and see why it is, if it's a bug or something. So in that cases, yeah, definitely CLI is useful. But normally when things are going good and working fine, I hope sticking to CLI or sticking to GUI would be better. CLI is needed when it is needed. When you want to do some flow basic log captures, or when you want to do any session matching, or when you want to clear any session. Of course, it can be done through GUI also. Yeah, CLI is used for its own purposes. We can see a few scenarios where CLI would be useful, but most of it would be dealt with in GUI from my side.
Okay, thank you. Understood.
Yeah. Okay, then we'll see tomorrow. And tomorrow's class, as I said, it's going to be on Panorama. We will be covering the basics of Panorama and why it's needed, what's its purpose, and how do we integrate Panorama to a Palo Alto firewall and manage the firewall through Panorama. So I hope I'll expect the same crowd tomorrow as well. Hope to see you there tomorrow then. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope the videos will be sent to you tomorrow from the backend team, or today once the video is ready, it will be sent out to you over to your email address, so you can watch it back whenever you have time. Yeah. Great. See you all tomorrow then. Thank you. Have a nice day.